Okay, so good morning, everybody. And for those in the United States and in Latin America, good afternoon for those in Europe and good evening for those in Asia and Australia. And welcome to our very exciting webinar in which we are going to be attending the presentations of the finalists for this year DIS SDP Practice Award. I'm Gilberto Montebeller. I'm the chair of the award this year. And it's my big pleasure to have here both presidents of the two societies that sponsor this award, Emanuele Borgonovo, who is a president of the DAS, the Decision Analysis Society, and Ayaz Radad, who is the president of the Society of Decision Professionals. So welcome to both of you. And we really appreciate your support to this initiative. It's the first time we are running this via a webinar, and we are very excited about the opportunity. So the next slide, please, Hilda, and then I'll call Emanuele to present and give an overview about the Decision Analysis Society. So the floor is yours, Emanuele.
Thank you very much, Gilberto, and thank you, Ayaz. Thank you, the SDP, for hosting this event, which, as you know, is particularly important because it celebrates the practice of decision analysis and also celebrates the link and the friendship between the Decision Analysis Society and the Society of Decision Professionals. It is a joint initiative, and I really would like to warmly thank the committee, Gilberto, Nadia, Valentina, Jay, and so I will list them all also afterwards, but really thank you very much for all the work. Thank you very much to also the participants, to the competitors in this competition, and then thank you to all of you for being here. The Decision Analysis Society has as its purpose to foster the theory and practice of decision analysis with an eye on research, an eye on the theory, but an eye also on practice, as this award testifies. I am Emanuele Borgonovo, I'm the president, and in terms of activities of the Decision Analysis Society, you probably know them well, but we offer two main conferences. One is the ADA conference, is going to come in June. And then we have several events at the Informs conference. I will talk about a couple of them afterwards. And as you know, we have another main outlet, which is the Decision Analysis Journal, where everyone is invited to submit your work, even if it comes from practice. So don't be refrain from the fact that it is a scientific journal, but every contribution to decision analysis is welcome there. So next slide, and now we can go. Okay, for coming events, here is where we are now. So I really wish to thank the committee with Valentina, Gilberto, Nadia, Papa Mikhail, but also Jay Anderson, Hilda, Carol Liefman, Jeff Kisler here, who will be also one of our committee members. So thank you very much for the time and for making this event possible. Among the forthcoming events, some are now coming at the Informs annual meeting. The first one is on October 24th, 7:45 Pacific time, and it's a Peter Fishburne Memorial Panel to remember Peter Fishburne, who was a giant and an icon of decision analysis and who unfortunately passed away on June 10th this year. So it will be a nice moment if you can join us to even review the story of decision analysis and several of its contributions. The organizer of the event is Robin Keller, and there will be also fantastic speakers talking about the merits of Peter Fishburne. On October 25th, don't miss it, there will be the DAS business meeting. It's an open virtual event to all members of the Decision Analysis Society, and we'll tell you everything that has happened in the past year, and we will also tell you what is going to happen next year. On October 26th, there will be the DAS Award sessions, again at the Informs conference, and the winners of today will be presenting there. Lastly, let me recall that after the stop due to COVID, we are going to relaunch the Advances in Decision Analysis Conference in 2022. It will be from June 22nd to 24th, 2022, Washington, D.C. So to make the numbers easy, the year is 22 and the day is June 22nd. The next slide, and okay, here you find our website. We are under Informs. Join us as a member. There will be a lot of possibilities to be involved in decision analysis and in the Decision Analysis Society. Thank you again for making this opportunity, and I leave the floor now to Gilberto, and in turn to Eyas.
Many thanks, Emmanuel. So now the floor is to Eyas Radat, the president of SDP. Eyas, to you.
Thank you, Gilberto, and thank you, Emmanuel, for this partnership on bringing the best of decision analysis practice out there. And it is an honor to partner with the DAS on this. I also add my voice of thanking the committee and the many applicants who submitted their applications. As usual, this prestigious award comes with a pretty high bar for selection, and I am very proud with seeing the finalists here today and excited to see their presentations. SDP is a society maybe not as old as DAS, but it is very much coupled with the DAS from the sense of our mission. Our mission is really to bring decision quality to important and complex decisions faced by organizations, individuals, and society. So our focus is more on the practical side, the practitioners, and our membership of 750 or so is largely practitioners with a good pipeline of students who have an interest in the society as they grow into their professional careers. The society serves this membership and a broader society with a range of offerings, from conferences. You might be familiar with DAG. We actually just had a name change recently, so it will be called SDP Conference, Annual Conference and Workshops. And we also have those workshops to be highly sought by many in our membership, and thus I encourage you to look at our conference advertisements. We have a range of webinars also that we have, a library of digital material that could be quite useful for enhancing careers and learning, and networking opportunities from chapters, interest groups, and councils. Next slide, please. I want to remind everyone in the audience that you can also leverage the SDP certification process to get certified, which could be a good career enhancement accomplishment. And the range is from an entry-level associate certification that is focused on basic knowledge, all the way to fellow, who would be a leader in the practice, but also contributing significantly to the field broadly. Next slide. A couple of our upcoming events. On the right side, you see November 5th, very soon, is a very exciting summit on the energy transition in the oil and gas industry generally, and energy transition globally. It is going to be an exciting program with many executive leaders who are coming to this one-day event. I will be hosting a panel in it. And a plug for next year's SDP conference, which we are calling for presentations these days. It will be in April of 22. It will be the first time since COVID also to be a physical conference. Hopefully everything remains as expected today. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Gilberto.
Many thanks, Eyas. So let me just talk a little bit about the awards, the DIS SDP award this year. I just want to recognize the chairs that have been mentioned before, Jay Anderson, Valentina Ferretti, and Nadia Papa-Mikhail. And big thanks to Nadia that helped a lot in organizing all the paperwork and all the details and advertisement. And also to Hilda for all the support with this webinar. Next slide, please. So the award is awarded jointly by the Decision Analysis Society and the Society of Decision Professionals to the best example of decision analysis practice as judged by this committee. And the purpose of the award is to publicize and encourage outstanding applications of decision analysis practice. I just want to acknowledge the support from DIS in providing the financial reward for the award, and from SDP in providing the platform for this webinar and all the infrastructure that was gently provided to us. The committee this year, I am the chair, and we have also the chairs, Valentina, Nadia, and Jay. And from the DIS, we have the pleasure to have the president here, Emanuele Borgonovo, as member of the panel, and also Jeff Kisler. And from SDP, we have the pleasure of having the president, Eyas Radad, but also Carol Liefman very kindly joined us. So I just want to thank you in advance for all your time and commitment to this initiative. The next slide, please. So the criteria that we follow are four main criteria. The first is a clear framing of the decision situation using the principles of decision theory. The second one is the quality and originality of the decision analysis techniques that were employed. The third is the centrality of the analysis to the client's decision-making process and the impact that it has caused. And the fourth are the benefits of the decision analysis to the client, stakeholders, and the public, taking into account the importance of the problem. So these are four broad criteria that we think cover very well the types of applications that we want to promote and reward in decision analysis. And before I mention the three finalists this year, this is an invitation for the attendees this year to consider next year applying for this prestigious award, because we want to promote high quality decision making and decision analysis in practice as well as in theory. So there was a strong competition this year with very strong submissions, and we are very pleased to announce that there are three finalists that are the three of them with very strong projects, we believe. And I just want to mention those three projects that are going to present in a few minutes. The first one is Joyce Ribeiro Giacon, Gustavo Martins, and Kislan Santos from Brazil with the project Optimum Supply e-procurement decision analysis platform to maximize the value of strategic sourcing choices. The second one is Love Eckenberg, Adriana Mihai, and colleagues with the project. They are coming from Austria and Sweden with the project Mitigating Cognitive and Behavioral Biases During Pandemic Responses, Evidence-Based Methodologies for the Development of Epidemic Combating Policies. And the third one is Sarah Bansal and Genaro Gutierrez from the United States with the project Use of Judgmental Forecasts with Expert Heterogeneity to Support Biofuel Jet Fuels in a Federal Aviation Administration Program. So without further delays, let's start and kick off with the first project. So I invite Joyce to share her screen. Participants are going to have 20 minutes for the presentation, followed by 10 minutes for questions and answers from the judges. So I wish every success to the three finalists, and we are looking forward to attending your presentations about the exciting projects. So Joyce, to you now, please.
Thank you, Gilberto. So first of all, I want to present myself. My name is Joyce. I'm COO of Optimum Supply. It's an honor to be here today presenting our project, our work for you. I'm representing my colleagues at Optimum. And I want to thank the opportunity to be here as a finalist of this prestigious award. So I want to extend my thanks to the award committee, to SDP, to DAS, and I also want to congratulate the fellow projects and my colleagues that are also finalists. So Optimum Supply, as Gilberto already mentioned, is a Brazilian company, and we created this company trying to combine two very important issues: decision analysis and procurement. And I want to start this presentation giving a baseline of what procurement is and why it's important to address decision analysis in this context of procurement. So this is a very basic procurement process where we first identify a need of a product or a service in a company. Then we go to the supplier selection, choose a winner and place an order for this product and service, and goes with the operational issues of receiving these goods and payment to the supplier. When we look at this process, the supplier selection part is by far the most strategic step. And when we go a level deep in this supplier selection process, we can see that we go through these 5 main steps of identifying the potential suppliers for this need, then request information, proposals, and quotations for the suppliers. Then we have to compile all this information, all this data in a result analysis, and go further for negotiation with the supplier, and then choosing a winner supplier. Optimum supply platform that I'm going to show to you during this presentation gives supports for the main steps of the supplier selection, and where the decision analysis takes place during the result analysis, and also the choosing the winner supplier. So now, starting with why procurement is so strategic for companies. First of all, the quality of decision-making in procurement is very critical, because sourcing is the front door for suppliers. It is where you choose your main business partners to provide your products, your services to customers. So this is very critical, because we are talking about very high spends. We are talking about strategic contacts, very long-term contracts. It's not easy to switch an incumbent supplier. And we are also talking about demanding and repetitive purchasing. So this is very intense in the procurement routine. Purchases, they are also increasingly strategic and complex. And that's why we have a lot of variety between items, customization required by clients. We have many items, many different items needed to be purchased with a variety of specifications, different needs. We have many stakeholders interested in this decision. And also, when we compare suppliers only by cost, it's not enough to make a fairly decision. It's not a good decision to be based only on cost. There are many studies showing that, and also there are many research showing that our cognitive limitations leads us to decision bias if you don't use a method or a decision analysis approach helping to find the ideal solution for this problem. We have another very important and very preeminent issue looking at procurement, that is ESG. ESG is very important to any company nowadays that considers being serious about the environment, the social needs, and being sustainable to the world. And a huge part of an ESG approach rely on its suppliers, on your company suppliers, because you have to look at the extended supply chain and be responsible for the whole cycle. So here we are talking about image concerns, also government policies. We have some news that were released in Financial Times some weeks ago, showing that there are Brazilian companies trying to overturn Brazilian bad image, bad environmental image, because our government policies are not helping to give a sustainable policy and ESG policy for companies. So companies have twice the work to get this done. And I think everybody is familiar with the cost of environmental disasters and social repercussion if something goes wrong. So it's also about risk analysis here. And we can see in the stock market that green companies have a better value. They worth more than traditional companies, so showing that the market is recognizing this importance. So when we combine decision analysis for sourcing, there are no available tools to support these complex procurement scenarios. The traditional e-procurements that exist today, they lack intelligence for the supplier selection for this strategic part of choosing the best supplier for your needs. NPV, the analysis decisions and other kind of decisions based only on cost, they are not enough to access overall value and to compare fairly the suppliers. And decision trees that are a great tool used for decision analysis, it's not enough also to this complex scenario with multiple objectives and intangible aspects. So looking at this, we see that multi-attribute value analysis matches this procurement requirements, this procurement needs, but it needs to be more practical for business approach. This raw academic approach, it's not suitable for companies for their routine and for the intensity and the velocity that they need in their business. So thinking about that, we created Optimum Supply, and I'm going to show you our approach with companies. So I'm going to show you our approach based on two main examples with our clients, two main client cases. One of them, the first one is from JBS. JBS is one of the greatest meat providers and ready-to-eat foods also. They are a Brazilian multinational company, and they have a lot of factories to process all this meat. And one procurement category that is very, very important to them is called MRO. There is maintenance, repairs, and operations. It's all the materials that are used in industry to make the factories operate. And usually this kind of bids for these categories, there are very large bids, multi-items with a complexity of many items and long tails. It's usually a very hard procurement category to handle. So we had this case of a bid run with 6,801 items for tools and abrasive materials. There were 7 suppliers invited, and their concerns were operational. They were about cost, they were about quality, and they were about supply guarantee. Okay. So through our platform, we can model the entire bid process since the requisitions for the suppliers, so we can the client can define what his needs on RFI, RFP, request for information, for proposal, and send this to the suppliers, and also model the decision analysis value tree. And the heart of the decision analysis here is totally customized by the client. So he creates the criteria that it represents, that better represents its decision in a very easy way on this web platform. And also he can model the value functions. So the value functions, they are generated automatically by our platform. using the range of performance provided by the supplier's proposals. And the user, the client can edit these value functions as it better models its preferences. So he creates a piecewise linear function. He can redefine the intervals of performance, and he can adequate as his needs for the better representation of the decision context. After we have all data from suppliers and we have also this model done, then we can calculate the decision analysis in two different approaches. One, just looking at, we call it here MCDA, it's the multi-attribute value analysis, or calculating a portfolio, that is a multi-attribute value analysis combined with optimization for the multi-items bids. Okay, so I'm going to show you the results for both of them. First, the decision analysis for a multi-attribute value. We have a general and overall performance clearly analyzing which supplier is better at each criterion. And this is great for our clients to go to a negotiation and to understand what are the strengths and the weaknesses of each supplier. And we also have some support analysis and charts comparing suppliers 2 by 2 and giving the weighted of the weights considering, and also showing our clients the cost benefit scenario of this bid. So it's easier for him to guarantee that it's not only the cheapest choice, it's the better overall choice, and takes some of this weight of only the financial aspects. When it talk about the multi-item portfolio decision analysis, we create in the platform some scenarios that compare different uses of this combination of optimization and the multi-attribute decision analysis. For instance, here, the first scenario, it's just the optimization of cost. We always present a scenario that's just an optimization, just to be your reference in this analysis, in this result analysis. And in scenario number 3, that we can see here in the middle, we can see the optimization of the overall global value for the suppliers. So in these scenarios, we create a combination of suppliers to provide the best scenario, the best result for our clients. And he can choose in between these scenarios and ask to run again with some differences. So he can guarantee that the winners are really what they need and what they are expecting to attend. Another application that I want to show you is from BBM. BBM is one of the largest logistics operations from South America, and they use our platform also for many different applications. But here I want to highlight their use of ESG as a governance for all strategic bids that they run. So this is something that they are doing for every strategic bid. We are talking about 50 bids per year for strategic issues. And their goals here are for supplier development and long-term goals for a sustainable supply chain. So they are looking at developing the ESG maturity for the suppliers and also for them. So we have at the platform some templates where we can create different value models models depending of our needs, and they are adapted to any procurement process. So what BBM is doing here is creating like a fixed step of ESG assessment in every template, so you can give this assessment and also run the template as you need for different categories that has different needs. Again, all the parameters are customized by the client, and it's very important to highlight that we can also have a collaborative decision analysis where we can have evaluations like technical evaluations or risk evaluations given by some stakeholders or some important areas for this any bid process that will corroborate on these grades and on this value in the process. So this is just an example of one value tree that they use it with ESG, and they can also switch these weights and put a bigger weight or a lower weight depending on the weight of the ESG in a specific process. Okay. So they have the same platform screen here where they send to the suppliers a questionnaire, an assessment of ESG. It's like this. There are a number of questions that the suppliers are going to answer. And they have a summary table regarding the level of the maturity level of the supplier depending of its answers. So the supplier can be an advanced level of ESG, he can be a starting level of ESG. And the idea here is to monitor and in the future starting to be more hard of charging these for the supplier. And again, in the result analysis, we can see the presence of ESG here, bigger in one supplier and smaller in another supplier, but the supplier here has less ESG, but it has better cost because the value of the cost is bigger, so we can make trade-offs in this decision analysis, looking at this environmental and social aspects as well.
Joyce, you have 2 minutes, please.
Okay. So our main results are 85% of average productivity increase, looking at all these projects conducted with our clients. Okay, a 43 average overall value added, 13 average in cost savings. That's very important for procurement, and also some quality results like transparency and compliance, governance, more reliability and risk reduction, and the stakeholder engagement. I highlighted here some of our clients' testimonials. They are bringing the reliability, the time productivity, reducing time in decision making. Also the productivity gains again. And we have a factor of, because of the templates, of replicating some negotiations in a very easy manner, and that's very great for them, with also the quality of the decision analysis. Here I have the formulation for these problems. I think we are running out of time, so I'm going to leave the slides here for you, and feel free to talk about that later with me if you want. I have 2 technical solutions. We have one just the multi-attribute value analysis, and another one combined with linear programming optimization. Okay, and just to wrap up, our main conclusions are that we have a very innovative e-procurement platform. We combine the decision analysis and optimization for single or multi-item purchasing. we can support strategic and complex sourcing decisions, and we have very significant impacts by our clients on value-added productivity, cost savings, transparency, governance, and stakeholders engagement. For future developments, we have many plans. I bring 3 here to share with you. We want to increase decision intelligence features to better model the user preferences and try to prevent some biases. We want to extend sensitivity analysis and uncertainty modeling. We want to extend our analysis to combinatory actions, seeing synergies between items. Here I also leave you with 2 references that were the main base of the work that we conducted at Optimum Supply, and our main contacts, and feel free to reach out. It was a pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you, Gilberto. Sorry,
thanks, Joyce. Thanks,
about
Joyce.
my minutes delay.
Okay. So we have questions. Jay, you have a question, please? Go ahead.
Yes, Joyce, thank you very much. Very interesting presentation, very exciting, the work that you're doing with your colleagues. You mentioned in your talk that traditionally a company might take a supply selection that's based on financial metrics like cost or net present value or something like that. And I was wondering, when you work with your clients, do they tend to assign the bulk of their weight to those traditional financial metrics? That is, do they still say the cost is the main driver? And have you ever had a client where they've actually made the decision to go with a supplier that is not the low cost supplier, that if they had only focused on the financial aspects only, they would have chosen someone else, but they believed so much in the methodology that they went ahead and choose somebody that was more expensive? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for a question. The answer is yes for both. we have usually a tendency to put a bigger weight on financial aspects, and we try to lead our customers during our capacitation or trainings, or training process. During the setup of the platform, we give some training sessions that, and we give them the swing weights methods. We try to give some education about the weights importance. Regarding choosing another option that's not the cheapest cost, yes, we have some cases about that, and it's more common when you try to switch to take an incumbent supplier that's not good on level of service. So, for instance, we have a carrier that were not good in the service level agreements, and they were cheap. Yes, they were cheap, but they were not enough in the other aspects. So in this case, it's easier to show by the platform and to prove where the supplier is lacking performance. The punctuality is very bad. This is going to affect our customers. So we need to pay a little bit more because we can afford that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. Thank you, Jay. Any other questions from the panel? Just raise your hand, please. Jeff, and then Nadia, please.
Yeah. So the platform gives a lot of flexibility in terms of defining the attributes and the utility functions within the attributes. Do you provide any kind of guidance or templates that they can maybe start with and modify to get that, or is it done pretty much from scratch for each client, or how does that work, the actual development of the attributes?
Yes, thank you for your question. Our I always give a training before they started to use the platform. And on this training, we usually create a single template for them to begin. And then we can help creating more templates so they can handle by themselves. Also, we have two kinds of support. We have ready to go templates in the platform for like traditional purchasing, like, oh, I'm going to look at cost and quality and delivery levels. So it's like three main issues that are very common to many procurement process. So we have a ready template for that. And also we have like small tutorial videos on YouTube that they are linked with the platform, and they are very useful to the customer, to the client. He can like, oh, I have a question about that. Then he sees a 3-minute video about this function, and he remembers how to do it. So it's also one of the tools that we have to educate the client. Yeah. And we try to automate the maximum possible, like the value functions. We already give them linear by default. And for advanced process, oh, I want to adjust here, then he will adjust. But it's not like all process need to be adjusted.
Thank you, Jeff and Joyce.
Thanks.
Nadia, you have a question too, please.
Yes, please. Thank you, Joyce. A great presentation. I'm based at the University of Manchester in the UK. And over here, academic teams and companies they have developed some multi-criteria decision analysis tools. You might have heard about Visa, IDS. These are academic tools, or you might have heard about HighView. And could you please tell us a bit more about your tools and how they're different to other tools in the market?
Okay, I think thank you also for your question. I used Visa during my my master's, and it's a great tool, but I think it's not enough for corporate business because it doesn't fit in the routine of business. It's like it's a separate issue. You have to be a specialist to apply that. So I think the main focus for a platform is to be easy to use for buyers, not for specialists in decision analysis. So we focus in giving all the support without their needs to understand deeply how it works. So and that's one of our future developments, that what we have in our future roadmap, to be even more automatic like that. We guide him through the decision, and I think that's a very important part to be commercial. You don't need a specialist to use the tool. I think that's the main reason we see this opportunity in the market.
Thank you, Joyce.
Thank
I think
you.
we have thank you, Nadia. Just time for one last question, and I'm going to ask the question. So if you think about most applications of decision analysis, they are one-off, large models for complex decisions that are used once. And you guys are doing something that is kind of repetitive decisions. So can you very briefly just compare this idea of supporting repetitive decisions versus supporting one-off decisions?
I think it's a productivity gain. It's the time reduction for an intensive job in procurement. They need to run a lot of bids during the year, and if they need to think for weeks in a model before starting each one of them, they are not going to do it, and they are going to rely on costs, and they are going to decide without all the support. So it needs to be easy to use, and it needs to be very easy to replicate. Sorry, that's the idea of the templates. So we have one template because the category, the characteristics, they are there. They are not changing very much. When you look at this MRO that I cited with JBS, this material, there is maintenance materials, the specification, they are very similar from one bid to another. So the model is similar, but the items are going to change. So all the framework is already there, and you run very easily from one bid to another because you have this framework.
Thank you very much, Joyce. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we call the second finalist, Adriana. So if you share your screen, please.
Yes, of course. Just a second. Okay.
Yeah, so the floor is yours for 20 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to really thank you for this honor of being among the finalists for this prestigious award. For us, it is also an opportunity for presenting our work, since we are still in the midst of a problem currently at the global level. To put it in short, this project appeared last year in March 2020 in response to a need observed at a global level due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And more specifically, it was designed so as to respond to the need formulated by the government of Botswana, by the presidential task force in charge with mitigating the pandemic there, who didn't have epidemiologic models to use or decision support, any sort of decision support systems for trying to find the best way to mitigate the epidemic there. So the team is quite interdisciplinary. This is one thing I would like to start with. Ruven Eckenberg and Mats Danielsson, experts in decision analysis. I come from the social sciences and humanities. Nadia comes from YASA in risk analysis. Tobias is in charge with epidemiologic models, and Ahmed also in charge with the more technical aspects in mathematical models. So I was chosen to present the rationale of our project and the results we ended up with. So I will start a bit with formulating the problem. When the pandemic occurred, there were a few problems that became apparent. First of all, a lack of preparedness, and that was regardless of the country's development levels. This was a bit counterintuitive because there were lots of scenarios being discussed beforehand in previous projects, estimating or projecting an intervention plan in case a pandemic occurred. However, these didn't really work when the real scenarios kicked in. This resulted in many inconsistencies and unknown effects in the disaster risk reduction processes. These were mostly and mainly attributed to a limited and uncertain evidence on how the virus actually behaves. There was also a lot of fluctuating data, making the problem be even more difficult to address because of the ambiguity. There were other issues in assessing the risk. Of course, those concerned with epidemiologic aspects, case fatality rates, possible future scenarios, whether the health systems would cope, infectiousness, but also in actually making the decision on what measures to introduce so as to contain the pandemic, there were some cognitive biases at work as well. And these were quite apparent in media statements and in especially in media publications. Risk perception under ambiguity, availability cascade, the base rate fallacy, probability neglects, framing, groupthings, and so on. Another problem that challenged the current models, frameworks used for evidence-based policymaking was the huge degree of uncertainty in the available evidence, the ever-changing nature of data, and the fact that the mitigation options, alternatives, mostly looked only at the impact these measures would have upon the public health. They didn't take into consideration, they didn't include in the measurements the impact of the measures per se upon other aspects of socioeconomic systems. And sometimes this was explicitly addressed in some official statements in terms of how to balance the short-term costs with the long-term costs, but no model was provided that could be used in order to include all these different types of evidence, even if the evidence per se was uncertain and ambiguous. So what we proposed was a multi-criteria, multi-stakeholder framework for decision analysis under ambiguity. The objective being, firstly, practically, to provide the task force in Botswana with a framework and a model to use as they gather data, and more broadly, to promote such a framework so as to use it all along the pandemic or in future scenarios as well, because it is a model that can be adapted and that can be updated as new data comes in. So we took into consideration both health and economic, social, political effects of various containment measures, including both epidemiologic and socioeconomic value estimates. The framework considering different scenarios and mitigation measures under several criteria. This includes also co-creative work that that stipulates eliciting stakeholder preferences on risk attitudes and value trade-offs. In Botswana, the framework was applied at the in the first stage, where they were given an epidemiologic model estimating the evolution of the numbers of the infected cases in Botswana, and also a set of criteria and an overall framework that they could further use within the task force. Then in Romania, we expanded the model by including this co-creation aspect. We employed questionnaires to consult stakeholders on priorities in containing the pandemic. And then in Jordan, this co-creation was further expanded by employing 2 questionnaires and addressing more respondents. These countries, Botswana, Romania, and Jordan, they represent different socioeconomic systems, transition and developing countries. They have very different demographics, healthcare capacities, affecting the feasibility of some risk mitigation measures. However, this is precisely what we aimed to show and to do, to obtain a framework that can be used regardless of the regional conditions, but that, however, would lead to individualized, particularized decisions that might not be applicable to other regions or other countries in containing the pandemic. So the idea was to reach this common framework that could then be adapted regionally, given the demographics and socioeconomic conditions in every country. So there was firstly a question of what alternatives are to be evaluated so as to reach the best decision at a certain point in time, given the available data. And we selected 4 types of measures, of scenarios, to address the pandemic evolution based on scenarios created by Centers of Disease Control in Europe, in the USA, by the World Health Organization, but also by various consultants from the Imperial College London, of course, as well as from more local national consultants, Institute of Public Health, for instance. And we reached 4 working scenarios. Level 1, the first scenario is not mitigating it through social distancing. So except for pharmaceutical, of course, measures and those that would be applied anyway by the healthcare system, only case isolation, nothing else. Then a second scenario was the one typically used year after year when the influenza epidemic appears, namely localized action, aside from the pharmaceutical measures and case isolation, localized action when, for instance, 3 cases appear in an institution or work office. Then the third scenario, including some mild social distancing measures as well. And then the fourth one, suppression. Suppression meaning lockdown, more strict social distancing, and closures as well. Closures of enterprises, of schools, of public gatherings, and so on. There is the stringency level is different and grows with every type of measure we included, and with it also the social and economic costs of introducing the said measure. In evaluating them, a quite important part of the work was to establish useful criteria and the most relevant criteria when assessing these options. It wasn't at least in the public communication and in the public statements made by officials, most of the time the epidemiological aspects were addressed, sometimes the economic ones as well. However, the focus was definitely on the short-term impact of the spread. However, looking at statements made by other stakeholders as well, such as NGOs, representatives of chronically ill patients, women's rights associations, looking at the broader picture and at what was being signaled in the public sphere, as well as at articles and reports coming out, we established for each country a set of criteria on which we could estimate some data or some type of evidence could be obtained for each and every scenario. In Botswana, this is the most extensive criteria set, given that given the access to the task force in charge with managing the pandemic, we included what was signaled. So aside from the epidemiological systems aspects, we included economic, social, and behavioral aspects, environmental ones, long-term resilience, and political aspects. So this is, so to say, a complete set, but of course, needless to say, these are always subject to being updated and being refined in order to better clarify what is needed and what the conditions of a certain country demand. In Romania and Jordan, we included a subset of these criteria. And in Romania, we focused on what we can reasonably measure based on public reports. And this included, in terms of economic impact, for instance, short-term cost impact on specific industries. There were economic monitors showing data in real life. In terms of socio-behavioral impact, we looked at human rights, vulnerable groups, situation, access to education, and the impact on mental health. And in terms of political and governance impact, the risk of governmental abuses and resilience. These conditions and these criteria actually fit and were able to be conceived so as to fit the social values and the strength of institutions as well. For instance, in Romania, we took into consideration the low trust in authorities by the citizens. This is why we included the risk of governmental abuses, given that the democracy index shows there are still risks concerning that. So we looked at these long-term effects more broadly. In Jordan, we included the subset of 4 criteria where we had access to data. For each and every criterion, we obtained data, either numerical data, such as the one obtained for the epidemiologic estimations. So in order to estimate the direct fatalities, we used a model, an epidemiologic model, so as to be able to compare a bit the effect of the different mitigation measures upon the numbers of direct fatalities, or at least cases in every country. We started out with Botswana and then refined the model and used it for Romania and Jordan as well. This was done with the help of the expertise from the Department of Public Health Analysis and Data Management in the Public Health Agency of Sweden. It is our augmented SARE, susceptible, exposed, infected, and recovered model that used this regionalized demography. It included country-specific information for every country, such as population size in certain regions divided into age groups, morbidities in the population per age group, current numbers of confirmed cases per day divided per age group, and case severity. It accommodated various intervention time points. The first model had a single intervention in 2020, then the second model used for Romania improved this and accommodated 2 intervention points, and then in Jordan we had 3 intervention points, and it was expanded for 2021 as well. So aside from the values that we find in the first column under health, the direct fatalities, for each and every scenario we used, we estimated other values using numbers from GDP growth, estimates given by various health observatories, by institutes for evaluation and strategy, various indices such as the Inform Index for Risk Management, the 2020 Democracy Index, or Bloomberg's COVID Resilience Ranking. As you can see, some of them are quite precise, such as the numbers obtained from the epidemiologic models, but others, as the framework can accommodate that, include rankings, include estimations, and for instance, in Jordan, we included these qualitative assessments of whether the impact would be low, moderate, or severe. These can be estimated, for instance, by just looking at the mobility that is being allowed or restricted in a certain scenarios. Looking at the situation of looking at the vulnerability index in every country. Where is it more vulnerable? Does that scenario specifically increase or address that particular vulnerability? This includes, of course, the vulnerability of health systems as well. So the idea was to also take into consideration the benchmark we use. When do the numbers of cases, let's say COVID cases, would outweigh the health system capacity? Of course, this was previously done by Ferguson and other consultants when promoting one measure or another, but this is definitely something that needs to be used for other criteria as well, looking at this benchmark. Now, the co-creation part included web surveys, given the limitations of our working environment.
Adriana, you have 2 minutes, please.
Perfect, thank you. Some of us were in lockdown, so it was impossible to actually meet in person various stakeholders. So we sent in-depth web surveys that included ranking criteria. And the question sounded like, according to your perception of their relative importance, rank the criteria below from 1 to 9, for instance. This was used in Romania. We had respondents from the healthcare system, from a workers' federation, from academia. We had 17 responses at first. Then in Jordan, we increased the participation, and we also added aside from this first questionnaire asking a similar question on ranking criteria, we sent a subsequent questionnaire where we also provided our estimations of the values for every criterion taken into consideration. And by informing them of the estimated effects, we asked them to rank the measures from the best to the worst. This shows the tree showing you the ranking obtained after the co-creation part. And of course, this represents the Romanian stakeholder group, where some of the criteria were considered more important than others, and these were calculated and decided in the decision support tool created and adapted by Lou Weckenberg and Mats Danielsson. In the aggregation and evaluation part, these are two results that are again representing that moment in time with the data that we had, and they show an example of how we can obtain a high confidence actually result with uncertain data. So for these evaluations, the technical part that was a method for integrated multi-attribute evaluation under risk, it was subject to incomplete information. And to avoid some mathematical problems, aggregation problems, when handling set membership functions, we introduced higher order distributions for better discrimination between the possible outcomes. And for the decision structure, it was a common tree formalism was used. And a mechanism for considering the large uncertainties in the background data and regional conditions was needed. Thus, a new evaluation method was used based on the resulting belief mass over the output intervals. And the entire range of values was considered as the alternatives were presented across all criteria, as well as how plausible it is that an alternative outranked the remaining ones. And this thus helped in providing a robustness measure. In the evaluation, the decided software tool was used. This is now currently also being
Adriana, I'm afraid
adapted.
that we have to stop.
It's perfect because I can, yes,
I'm really sorry.
This is no problem, no problem.
Sorry about
I
that.
can give you information later on.
Sure, thank you very much.
I will leave this slide here with the two publications that include all the technical details on how these were aggregated and calculated. So thank you very much for your attention, and feel free to write if there is any, since I mentioned we are a multidisciplinary team, maybe some specific questions can be addressed directly to my colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jay, you have a question, please? Go ahead.
Adriana, thank you very much for a very interesting and compelling presentation on a very important topic. I was curious, you applied this through 3 different countries, and I was wondering if you could comment a little bit on the strength of the relationship between the analysis you did for each of these countries and what the government in these countries eventually decided to do. In other words, how informed was their decision by the analysis that you did?
Thank you for the question. Only in Botswana, we had direct access to the government and to the task force in charge with mitigating the pandemic. And we do know that they tried to avoid for a very long time introducing lockdown. Because of seeing our evaluation. They also had a few cases initially, so it was interesting that the African countries were a bit started to be confronted with a spread a few months after Europe and China were hit, and this left a bit of a window for them to see whether it is the case for them to introduce lockdown early on or not. And initially, this was the first solution they had in mind. And then after seeing the results, they alleviated that. But with concern with Romania and Jordan, we didn't have direct access to the government. This was the project expanded after being funded after the initial study on Botswana. It was funded by the European Science Cloud, and we could obtain more data for Romania and Jordan as well. But the governments didn't participate, only as respondents to our questionnaire, but they didn't necessarily adopt it. We did publish it. So what we think or hope we could do in a way is just to inform the public conversation in places where there is no direct link to the decision makers, at least to help frame the problem in a more balanced way, so to say.
Okay,
thank you, Adriana. Thank you, Jay. Nadia, you have a question too, please.
Yes, please. Thank you, Adriana. Great project. I wanted to ask you about your alternatives. In the beginning of the COVID crisis, some Asian countries came up with very long list of potential actions. And could you please tell us a bit more how you devised your list of COVID-19 risk management alternatives? And a follow-up question is, after you identified a set of values for different countries, did you revisit your list of alternatives and did you come up with any new alternatives?
Yes, thank you very much. It was a process indeed. These weren't the first choices. There were actually 6 initial scenarios we took into consideration, including South Korea's, for instance, approach in conducting massive testing and increased reporting and surveillance of the active cases. And we had another option that included a suggestion that came from the leading epidemiologist in Romania at the time, that proposed to radically isolate the elderly for 2 months. So very extreme social distancing in the case of the elderly, and leaving everything else open for the active workforce and for students. And this was a suggestion that was discussed in the public sphere in Romania, and we did include it at first. However, we ended up with the conclusion that looking at the values held by the citizens and at the public reactions to what he suggested, that would have been unfeasible for Romania. It would have been ethically unacceptable to try to isolate a vulnerable group for such a long time. So this is part of a co-creation process to also look at the social values of the ones who are impacted by a policy. And slowly, we eliminated either the scenarios that would have been publicly unacceptable for the citizens of that particular region, or when looking at the differences or the lack of too many differences in the epidemiologic modeling. So if 2 scenarios, for instance, would have had very similar results in terms of direct impact on the public health, then we chose the one that was more commonly used at a country level or spoken about, because on that we would have had more information on other criteria. So we would have had a better overall picture.
Thank you, Adriana. Thank you, Nadia. I have a follow-up question on that. So I noticed that your first option is an unmitigated epidemic. And I noticed that the estimate you had for the fall of GDP, I believe, which is in the table,
yes,
is the shortest one, is the lowest one, between 1% and 3%, I believe. But this goes against what we have from economic data, which show that countries that had a large number of cases actually had a large drop in GDP because there are spillovers from the economy or from health to the economy. So people feel afraid of going to shops and workers are sick. So my question here is, how have you assessed those estimates and to which extent they are realistic? Please?
Yes, thank you. This was the most difficult part in assessing the economic impact because of global spillover effects, because of the, trans-border effects. So this was definitely one of the most difficult, and a problem where we agreed to settle with these very rough estimations that don't, for instance, radically differ, for instance, from level 1 to level 2. It was an estimated between 1.3, 1.4. pretty much similar, but it was very difficult to estimate this. And we just decided to include this based on the initial forecast made by the European Commission and by economic monitors in every country. But apparently the estimations were faulty on their part as well. We depend on others, we depend on data, and as long as the model supports updating data, then we said let's go with what we have now. This was estimated last summer, so I think June 2020. But it is precisely because of these issues that we wanted to just show how the framework can accommodate these updates, and it's not a problem. The results we obtained are temporary. We do not recommend neither to Botswana directly to the government. We did not recommend a certain set of criteria based on our evaluations, precisely because, first of all, we don't have access to all data, and secondly, it is not, we are not the policymakers. We just want to provide a decision analysis framework for what a colleague named an epic decision problem. And so this is, I would love to have access to more data and to see an actual working and applicable result.
Okay, thank you very much, Adriana. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we go to our third finalist, Saurabh, please. If you could share your screen. So you have 20-ish minutes to go. I think I gave 22 minutes to every presenter, so I'll give you the same around 22 minutes, and I'll let you know when you have 20 minutes already gone.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I hope all of you can see me and hear me clearly. I'm glad to be here. Myself, Saurabh Bansal, my co-author, Hinaro Guterres, is also on this call. I'm going to talk today about a project that we did in collaboration with the Federal Aviation Administration. The loose outline of my talk is as follows. I'm going to provide some contextual details first. The decision analysis applications that we do, the techniques that we use, they are specific to the contextual details of projects. So I want to spend some time in discussing the contextual details, so that to make 2 points. First, that the application was unique, and the second point is that we were not able to use off-the-shelf decision analysis techniques and methods available, so we had to develop our own technical know-how here. I'm going to talk about that technical development, and then I'm going to talk about how that technical development and implementation led to a change in the decision-making process at the Federal Aviation Administration. And then I'll conclude by discussing some of the benefits that the organizations involved in this research program saw. So this project is in collaboration with the Ascent at FAA. Ascent is the Federal Aviation Administration's Sustainability Center. It's the Aviation Sustainability Center. It was established with 3 motivations that you see on the screen. The 2 motivations that are of relevance to us are shown to you in red. First, focusing on meeting the environmental and energy goals of the next generation air transportation system, so environmental and energy goals. And second, exploring ways to produce sustainable aviation fuels at commercial scale, creating an industry with large scale economic development and job creation. So sustainability and then economic development and job creation. These were the 2 items that our particular project focused on. Ascent is a massive center. On the screen, in the right side of your screen, you see a bunch of academic institutions that are affiliated with the center, and the researchers from these institutions work in conjunction with the FAA to look at new things. What you see on the left side is just a smattering of some of the firms that are associated with Ascent. The list starts with A and ends at D because I ran out of space, but these are all the private entities or NGO kind of entities with names starting from A to D that are associated. The list naturally goes on, but I didn't have enough space here to include all those entities. But the bottom line is that this is a massive program at Federal Aviation Administration. Federal Aviation Administration wants to make sure that the future of the aviation industry is centered around sustainability and around socioeconomic growth that this particular industry is able to stir in the economy. Our particular focus was on figuring out how to create sustainable biofuel supply chains for alternative jet fuels. What is alternative jet fuel? Alternative jet fuel essentially is jet fuel that is produced using biomass, and then it is blended with fossil fuels to some extent, and then airlines use that for aviation purposes. What are biofuel supply chains? I've shown you a depiction of a sample biofuel supply chain on the screen. There are two pathways, as we call it, for biofuel supply chains. The first one that you see at the top is coming from woody energy crops. Essentially, these are tall trees that you can harvest, and then you can use the biomass, put them in elevators. These are pre-processing units that will chop off the mass and then do some pre-processing, and then eventually send that mass to biorefineries. Biorefineries are in the process of developing new technologies and new techniques to take this biomass and then essentially catalyze it or decompose it and then restructure it into hydrocarbons that can be then used into blending facilities to obtain alternative jet fuel. Our focus is on the other side that you see from the at the bottom. We are looking at energy crops that are not trees. So we are looking at wild grasses. We are looking at oil seeds and so on. The rest of the cycle remains the same. These wild grasses are harvested. They're sent to pre-processing facilities. From there, they go to biorefineries and so on. Now, the reason why we are focusing on wild grasses specifically is driven by the two motivations that Ascent has that I talked about. The first one is socioeconomic and second one is sustainability. So let me provide some details for that. What you see on the screen, on your screen, is what a coal mine looks like after it has been abandoned. Abandoned for various reasons. Maybe there is no more coal in it. Maybe government regulations have changed. Now, I'll show you a map in a minute where these coal mines are located, but mostly they are located in the middle of nowhere. And for the longest time, these coal mines were the economic engine in that particular small town. And when these mines are shut down, individuals do not have a source of livelihood. And landowners, they can't do anything with this land because, as you can see, not many things can grow on this land. You can't grow corn on it. You can't grow soybean on it. You can't grow a commercial crop on it. So there was a socioeconomic opportunity here to focus on this kind of a land and see what can be done with it. Well, it turns out that while you can't grow or any commercial crop on it, the local native grasses will still flourish in it because they don't need as many nutrients, and somehow the climate is just right for them. And when you do it right, the changes can be pretty transformative. So what you see on the left of your screen is a mine, a coal mine that is in operation. And then what you see on the screen to the right is a mine that has been, to some extent, it has been rehabilitated after performing some operations and some growth of local grasses. So when done right, it can be pretty transformative for the environment. But at the same time, it gives farmers or landowners some ability to engage in some economic activity on their land. And this is a strong motivation for this research program. These coal mines, abandoned coal mines, are present everywhere in the US. So this is a map of that shows only abandoned mine land for coal. You can find similar maps for metals also. I've not shown you that map because abandoned metal mines have different considerations that we are not there yet in terms of addressing, but we are there in terms of addressing abandoned coal mine issues to a larger extent. The second motivation of this program was that there is a sustainability need. Ascent wants to make sure that US jet fuel supply chains are self-reliant. That concern has been addressed more lately because of the shale deposits. US's energy is sufficient, but resilience and sustainability aspects are still a big consideration. And this focus on using abandoned mine land was a good way to try to address both these aspects. So now let me shift gears a little bit and then talk about specifically what was the project. Our project focus was that we have all these lands available where not much will grow, but wild grasses will. So why not invest in R&D to come up with better varieties of these wild grasses. And by better, what I mean is that they provide us more energy per ton. Let's come up with better varieties that give us more energy per ton so that farmers can get a better value from their land that otherwise doesn't have much value. Let me talk about why this particular problem is non-trivial. So when I showed you all the listing partners of Ascent, it's a massive, massive enterprise. And these are some of the places where some of those facilities of those organizations are located. And a very common issue that the research program kept running into was how to manage distributed innovation or distributed expertise. So specifically, you see a triangle on the screen. I'm here in central Pennsylvania where it shows field trials. In Happy Valley, there are lots and lots of field trials lands. So essentially, there are stretches of land where Penn State will grow different varieties of corn, soybean, wild grasses, what have you, and then obtain its yield, see how well it's able to do well in the land, and then provide that information to techno-economic models. Techno-economic models are sometimes developed and maintained by different teams. So for example, here I've shown you a particular case where the techno-economic analysis was done by the team at University of Tennessee, Bert English's team. So when Bert English is looking at all the data that is coming in, he's crunching some numbers and he's trying to figure out at what point this biofuel supply chain becomes sustainable. He's concerned about the averages. On the other hand, when you look at the refinery, which is in Colorado, there is a big biorefinery there. The refinery owner has invested hundreds of millions of dollars there in installing huge equipment that can take biomass in thousands of tons per year and catalyze it and try to get biofuels. Now, the extent to which these three partners of the supply chain or R&D innovation are looking at pieces, they're looking at different pieces. The refinery owner is looking, or the refinery team is looking at how the biomass responds in big settings. Field trials are looking at how the plants are doing in small land patches and perhaps in test tubes. Whereas techno-economic analysis is trying to do both. They have small equipment in-house that they can try to figure out what's the energy production from various grasses, but they are not as big as refinery. They are somewhere in the middle between refinery and field trials. So when you have different expertise coming in and you are trying to figure out, okay, we have explored this particular set of grasses, what's the next set of grasses we should explore? It becomes a tricky issue. Let me show you an example. So in terms of status quo, suppose there are two varieties of a particular wild grass, miscanthus, willow, or whatnot, and the varieties are A and B, and we can potentially crossbreed them. Now, the refinery expert says that based on his experience, the cross of A and B grasses is going to lead to a variety that can give you 40 British thermal units per ton. The field trials expert says, no, it's only going to give you 35, and therefore it's not worth pursuing. And the techno-economic expert, he will say that, he says that the cross will give us 45 British thermal units. So it's definitely worth pursuing. Well, what happens when you have these three different numbers? How do you reconcile them? Okay. And there are two ways in which typically it was done at the research program. The first one was that let's take an average, people. Let's just take an average and then make decisions based on that. The second item, and that happens sometimes, and it does happen in almost all decision analysis situations, is that sometimes we tend to defer to the judgments or the opinions of people who are most experienced. And that also happened in this endeavor. It turns out that both these approaches are problematic because when we take an average of judgments, we are ignoring the fact that within the team, there are different expertise. Some people may be more proficient in exploring certain types of grasses than others. So this relative expertise is lost. Similarly, when we look at the most experienced person's judgment, that has its own problems. Experience does not equal to expertise. Sometimes also what might happen is that the person who's most experienced, he may not have a direct expertise on something specific. So for all these reasons, there was a need to come up with a more formal way to aggregate these judgments and then figure out what is the potential of new varieties of wild grasses for biofuel supply chains. Now, as a first cut, when we came across this problem, we thought, oh, this is a standard TA problem, decision analysis problem. The classical prescription was given by Bates and Granger, and then Winkler sort of fleshed it out a little bit more. And what they say is that you take the judgments by individual people, and then you assign them specific weights or you scale them. And that gives you a pretty good idea of the average potential of a particular candidate. When we tried to implement this, it did not go down well. It did not go down well for lots of reasons, and I'm going to discuss some of these reasons soon. So eventually, we took Keeney's route. So Keeney's route is that listen to people, see what they are saying, ask them what judgment are they giving, ask them to explain what's going on in their head when they're providing something. So when we did that, it turns out that the diagnosis was that all the three experts, they were coming from different vantage points. They were concerned about different things. Their preferences were different. And therefore, they were focused on different metrics. So the refinery owner, the expert at the refinery, was giving us his estimate of the low side of the potential of a grass. Why? Because the refinery has put in hundreds of millions of dollars, and they want to make sure that when something comes in their refinery, it's going to break even for them. And so they're taking sort of a conservative route, and they're saying that, tell me what's the worst that could happen, what's the downside that could happen with the candidate. The field trial expert, they are excited about being able to grow new things, and they think it's great. And so they are looking at how well a particular variety can do. And so in their lingo, they are giving us an upside. Whereas the team that is running techno-economic analysis, they understand that there are natural variabilities. And so all they want to focus on is, on average, what's going to happen. So these three experts are actually giving us different things. And because they are giving us different things, it's not clear whether we can use the standard techniques given by Bates and Granger and Winkler to combine these judgments. The second wrinkle that we appreciated was that it turns out that what we are trying to estimate was the energy yield. And this yield is not an epistemic uncertainty. It's not something that has only measurement error. It is an aleatory uncertainty, which means that there is a natural variation. And it was important for us to capture that natural variation. And I'll show you in a minute how we were able to sort of integrate this idea of aleatory uncertainty with what is it that they were providing in a clean manner. So overall, after this diagnosis, we realized that we need a new development. So now let me talk about the technical development that we had for the project. So our analytical development essentially had three parts. The first part or first step was we will calibrate we'll focus on individual teams, and within each team, for each expert, we will try to figure out what quantile they are providing of the yield distribution and what's the variability around it. So I'll show you in a minute how that is done. Once we have this idea of what is it that they're giving us and how consistently they are giving us that quantity, we can then import this information into an optimization model. And then in that optimization model, we will be able to deduce the weights to estimate the mean or the standard deviation or the quantile of the yield distribution. And then once we have these solutions from the optimization model, we can then start using these weights on the experts' judgments for the future varieties that haven't been grown yet. So overall, the first step goes like this. The research program has been in place since a few years now, and they have tried to grow a lot of strains, a large number of times in a large number of field trials. So we do have some calibration distributions available in the lingo of Roger Cook. We do have some empirical distribution. So for all those distributions for various hybrids, we would go to the expert and each expert and say, please give us your estimate. Whatever your mental calculus is, just give us that point estimate consistently. So for example, for a hybrid one, the first expert says 9.7, second one says 15, and the third one says 13.5. Our empirical data says that the mean is 11 and the standard deviation is 2.77. What we can do is we can now deduce what quantile each of the experts is providing for hybrid 1, hybrid 2, hybrid 3, and so on. And once we have done that, we can quantify them and we can sort of show those quantification in terms of these histograms. So what you're seeing on the screen are three histograms. First is by the judgments of experts 1. We have calibrated his judgments on the standardized Z-score, and we have plotted a frequency histogram of the Z-scores. This is useful for us in multiple ways. The first reason is that Z-scores are general for location scale distributions, so we don't need to restrict ourselves to normality or symmetric distributions. We can also cover asymmetric distributions. Z-scores are scaleless, which means that we now have the ability to take judgments in different domains of different seeds, perhaps that have different bounded support. And we can take all those judgments and standardize them into this scale-free scale, so to speak. And we can do the same for expert 1, expert 2, expert 3. Two things come out of this kind of calibration. The first one is, on average, we can figure out which quantile every expert is providing, and then we can figure out how consistently they are providing or what's the variability in their judgments. We can also figure out the covariance in the variation that they exhibit. Once we have all this information, we can use an optimization model in the following way. What we seek to estimate most generally is a combination of a linear combination of mean and standard deviation. That's what you see. We want to estimate the G function, which is a linear alpha 1 times mu plus alpha 2 times sigma. It's a linear combination of the two moments of the location scale distributions. We chose this form because sometimes decision makers want to estimate the average performance. Sometimes they want to estimate the CVAR, conditional value at risk. Sometimes they want to estimate a different quantile. And this is a generic form for that. We want to estimate this function using the judgments provided by individual experts. So when we plow through some of the math, and we had submitted a manuscript that appeared in operations research that has all the technical details, it turns out that if you have a location scale distribution, linear aggregation of expert judgments is optimal. It's just not convenient, it's optimal from a statistical perspective. So now, when we found this result, we were able to now set up an optimization model, which basically says that we want to figure out how to go from individual judgments to mean and standard deviation. And the optimization problem that you see here essentially is a fancier version of generalized least squares, where the matrix Z is the average quantiles that each expert is providing, and the omega that you see is just the covariance matrix of the variation in their judgments. It turns out that this is again a standard problem, and it has a standard solution, but very interesting decision analysis implications for us. So the solution of this problem essentially is that once you have obtained point estimates from individual managers, you multiply them by specific weights, and the weights are shown to you here at the bottom. This is an analytically closed form solution. You can implement it in any spreadsheet environment, any computational environment. It's easy to reduce.
Two more minutes, Saurabh, please.
Sure. So let me just quickly go through some of our analytical other features. The techniques that we developed are pretty generic. We can do lots of interesting things in terms of Bayesian analysis and so on. The changes in the decision-making process essentially were that we now have a better clarity for what is it that experts are providing. We are not changing in any way what they are giving us, but we now understand what is it that they are doing. And we also have a more systematic way to calibrate the judgments and come up with better recommendations for the future. Here are 3 impacts and benefits. First, overall, by using our approach, we documented that there has been a 22% better selection of projects, both in terms of reducing false negatives and false positives. And not only the estimation has improved of the potential of each class, we have also led to better selection of projects. Second, and this is an interesting insight, when is it that looking a better lens, finding a better expert is more useful? Our analysis showed that when you have a candidate solution, you have a candidate pool of 100 solutions. The point when the value is maximum is only when you're trying to find, say, 40 to 60% of the candidate solutions identified and we put them in. Why? Because the top 10% solutions will stand out regardless of how crummy the judgments are. The bottom 10% of the judgments, candidates will stand out regardless of how crummy the judgments are. So it now tells us what's the region where the value of expertise is maximized. And the last one is that, let me just briefly focus on the last part here. We have a complete cycle of decision analysis project, so to speak. We have a technical article in OR, we have a teaching case, and we are writing a practitioner's article. And this is my last slide, Gilberto. from managers' anecdotal evidence, what we found is that a lot of individuals said that they are glad that there is a process in place now, that they know what process is going to be followed every time they go to a decision-making room. Some of them said that I don't need to be the loudest person in the room anymore to get my way done. If I can see if my judgments are good, and if they are good, they are going to be weighed more. And the last item was from an outreach person who said that, you know, if our West Virginia farmers can make $200 per acre more from their land, and in that process give employment to someone else, then that has the potential of restarting the economy in these economically depressed regions. So this is my conclusion. We had a nice contextually rich problem. There was a solution that we developed for this problem because none of the existing techniques seem to work as such. And there are clear identified benefits, both quantified and as well as measured benefits. Thank you.
Many thanks, Saurabh. Jay, you have a question, please?
Saurabh, thank you very much for your presentation. It's fascinating and also a very interesting problem that you're working on too. My question relates to how you determine what the quantile is that a particular expert is assessing. It wasn't clear to me during your presentation how you could take a look at a particular expert set of assessments across the different varieties and say, oh, this must be a lower quantile or an upper quantile. And specifically, like for expert number one, if you're only looking at their data by themselves, you might, does your analysis work by saying, now that I look what expert two is saying, which is almost uniformly higher than expert one must be estimating a lower quantile than expert two? Is that how it works? That you need to—
Great point, Jay. I should have been more clear. So here's what I'm doing. I'm saying that my empirical distribution has a mean of 11 and standard deviation of 2.77. So what does the judgment of 9.7 correspond to? Which quantile and what's the z-score for that? I do the same for the second hybrid where the mean is 24 for the data, the standard deviation is 7.34, and the expert one gave us the data of 20.5. So on a mean of 24 and a standard deviation of 7.34, what quantile is 20.5? So I'm looking at each expert in isolation first to figure out what quantile they're providing me. I'm converting that into z-score, converting quantile into z-score, and then taking averages of all the z-scores that they are providing me.
Okay, that's more clear. Thank you. I was just curious, if you're interested in the underlying distribution, why not just ask each expert to provide a distribution rather than a point value?
That's a great point. That is a great point. And if it was possible to get complete distributions from experts, that would be great. But my experience has been that especially field trial peoples, they are more keen on giving you point judgments because that's the way they work. Okay,
thank you.
Now, if I may, let me also add one more item, Jay, that what if a natural question is, what if this calibration data is not available? That you don't have empirical distributions available? Then what you could do is you can simply say, historically, what did the experts say would happen and what actually happened, and then figure out how many times they overestimated, how many times they underestimated, and that will give you a quantile judgment of where they lie.
Thank you, Saurabh. I have a follow-up question, so I'm going to ask it right now. So in your nice example, you had what I'll describe as a motivational bias by the three, the very early example, a motivational bias on each side of the estimate. What if you have lots of experts that are motivated on the same side and none on the other side? So what if you have motivational bias that actually distorts the distribution?
That's a great point, Gilberto. So let me articulate it this way. So essentially what you're saying is that we have three experts, and it turns out that all of them are giving me, one of them is giving me 20th quantile on average, one of them is giving me 30th quantile on average, and one of them is giving me 40th quantile on average, right? Because they happen to be engaged in activities where all of them have the bias of estimating the lower side. When that happens, you're right. The improvement. So two things. First, in those situations, actually taking an average, which is a classical route, is going to completely backfire, right? Because you're taking averages of biased judgments that you know are biased. I think that problem will get addressed to a certain extent in our development because we are able to control in our formulas what the z-score says, what quantile are you providing me? Because if I can figure out what quantiles you're providing me, I can do some extrapolation on the other side also. Having said that, one of the results that we found in our paper was that if we have an expert who's providing us judgments in the tail, it actually may not be as bad for the following reason. Suppose you have an expert who's providing you judgments consistent, who's providing you judgments on average at the mode. Well, unfortunately, that expert really needs to be consistent also, because otherwise, every time they have a small up and down, it turns out that that small error around the mode has a larger impact on estimating the mean and standard deviations of distributions as compared to making some errors in the tails, because tails do not contribute a lot. Tails have less mass, so you can afford to mess up there, but not in the center. So to circle back to your point, if you have those experts who are biased, then in some sense our approach is saying if you can figure out what quantile they're providing you, you have ways to amend that.
Thank you. Thank you. Jeff, you have a question, please?
Yes, excuse me. Saurabh, so thank you for the very interesting talk. Just, I guess, a follow-up to our last question. If the you said in your slide that the different experts in different functions tend to focus on different metrics. Did you consider, or is there a reason why one wouldn't want to simply decompose the elicitations down to the level of those metrics and then aggregate, perhaps using the same approach you do here, from those metrics and combine them? I've seen people kind of try to make choices about exactly how to finesse that.
Jeff, I have to admit, I think I'm not familiar with what you are saying. Are you saying that we should see where the low side is coming from, upside is coming from, and then do something with that?
Well, if they care about, I don't know, different metrics, metric 1 and metric 2, and those tend to be informing their judgments, you could get judgments about metric 1 from each expert and judgments about metric 2 from each expert.
Oh, yes, great. So one of the things that came out was that the definition of low side and upside varies by organization. So when I worked with a commercial organization, their definition of low side and upside actually was interesting. They would say 1 standard deviation up and 1 standard deviation down. At another firm, they would say upside is 80% or 90% and low side is P10 or P20. So we could have done that. I think, unfortunately, what that would mean is for every team now, we need to figure out what is it that they mean by low side and upside, and then try to do something with that. We took a simpler route, so to speak, that was easier to implement. And we said, we understand where you are coming from. Just whatever you are giving us, please just keep on giving us that, the same thing consistently. And our approach is able to accommodate that.
Nice.
Thank you, Saurabh. Thank you, Jeff. Any further questions? I have a practical question, Saurabh. I think it's we are almost finishing our slot. So if you compare the sugarcane efficiency for ethanol in Brazil with corn efficiency for ethanol in the United States, sugarcane is much more efficient. So you use this less area for the same production of energy.
Right.
So you started talking about regenerating these areas, but I wonder to which extent this is actually efficient enough to justify the area that is being used for producing the biofuels.
So the area is massive. So Ascent is there are 2 lead institutions. One of them is MIT, and they did the first study that showed that that US has enough land to meet half of the entire energy needs of the US through that land, not without taking any significant portions from any of the commercial crops. So the potential is massive. So
right.
so that's why there is a focus that let's not try to investigate solutions that will essentially take land away from traditional agriculture, because we also have a pressure on producing enough food to meet the food nutrition requirements. So let's not try to take the land away from that, but let's try to identify other opportunities. that where nobody's cause is going to suffer a downside.
Thank you very much. So I think we're concluding.
Just a little comment.
Yeah,
These
sure. Go ahead.
marginal lands, they cannot be used for anything else. So obviously, the sugarcane and corn are going to produce a much higher content of energy, but neither sugarcane or corn can be grown in those lands.
Right.
Sorry for the interruption.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. Thanks, Gennaro. Thanks, Saurabh. And we are concluding our session. So I just want to thank Joyce, Adrian, and Saurabh for the excellent presentations, very interesting projects. I think you confirmed my expectations that they were really excellent. Nadia, do you want to say something before we finish? You raised your hand.
I just wanted to congratulate everyone and give them a clap, Gilberto.
Oh, yes.
But I chose the wrong gesture.
Yeah, I don't know how to clap, actually. That's,
yeah, I was trying to find the clap.
Anyhow, I'm going to clap.
Thank you very much, and thank you.
And I wish to thank also the two societies represented by Emmanuel and AES, and particularly I think highlight Hilda's key role here in organizing this this session today, and all our fantastic judges here, Carol, Jeff, Nadia, and I hope I have not missed anyone, Jay. Thank you very much for coming. We have a meeting after this one to make a decision about the prize, which is going to be actually announced during the Informs conference. I also wish to thank all the participants for the questions and the comments. Thanks for coming. And we encourage you to think about submitting projects for the prize next year. I was invited to be the chair, so I'll be with our colleagues running the prize again. So we already are asking for, excellent projects as these ones this year. So thank you very much. Have a good evening or a good afternoon.
Thank you.
And I see you guys, the judges, pretty soon in the other link. Thank you, Hilda, again, for all your help. We really appreciate it. Yeah. Fantastic. As always, super professional and amazing.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Thank you.